Welcome to Pioneers in Payments, where payments experts share their insights. Now, here's our host, Donna Blum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Pioneers in Payments. I'm your host, Donna Blum, and today my guest is a friend and somebody that I truly respect because he has so much experience in the industry and just a wealth of knowledge. Welcome, Mark Schermann with Marvin Consulting.
Thank you so much, Donna. I'm so glad to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience.
Well, I am looking forward to our conversation. I'm sure I'm going to learn some new things from you today, just about your experience and then your words of wisdom that you're going to share with our audience today. To get us started, though, Mark, for those of you who may not know you, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your background in the payments industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to the payments industry through a kind of roundabout way. My first adult job was for Merrill Lynch, and I was gathering assets to manage on behalf of families and individuals. And I did that for about 8 years. And many of the people that were in my portfolio were interested in private equity. And so for a friend's software company, I raised about $3 million. The private equity investment went really well for those folks. And I developed a bit of a reputation for being able to do that. And so along came the first Notcha compliant ACH conversion engine before Notcha had even allowed paper check conversion. We put about $1 million into that business, successfully exited the business, sold it to Jack Henry. And I found myself going out and talking to potential customers on behalf of that company, and we successfully sold a number of customers. Most importantly, the U.S. Army Air Force Exchange, and so I kind of got a taste for payments in that entire space, and had such a positive experience. I decided to stay in the industry and got out of the raising money business, and that began a long career. That I went from the sale of that business to Paymentech, where I was brought in to run agent bank and a referral bank channel, ISO channel too. Um, uh, the owner, the principal, the president at Paymentech at the time was Mike Duffy. Mike found out about my government sales experience, and he came in and he said, "I've lost my government salesperson, Mark. You have some experience. Will you do it?" And I said, "Sure." Little did I know, most of that business was being boarded onto Paymentech's e-commerce platform in Salem, which at the time eventually was in the nascent days of e-commerce, but eventually ended up with about 73% of the world's e-commerce business on that platform. So I got tremendous exposure into the billing space and gateway space and convenience fees and specialized contracting, and just kind of really at that point fell in love with the business. And from there, as many people in the industry for a long time would remember, Chase bought Bank One. Paymentech was a joint venture between Bank One and First Data. So after that acquisition and some subsequent payouts, I went to go work for Visa CyberSource, where I ran a region in the Midwest. And from there, I was recruited to work for ACI, where I was responsible for new logo sales in North America and Europe. So I had a team of folks doing that. And shortly thereafter, along came Mastercard, where I spent the last 4.5 years of my career representing partnerships, reselling their issuer processing platform, primarily focused on debit, and their third-party services via partnership to various players across the industry. So I had a long career in payments. Really enjoyed my time and meeting folks like yourself. Yeah, that's me.
That's wonderful. Well, so the company that you work for now, or I suppose the company that you are, is Marvin Consulting. So you've recently hung out your own shingle. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what do you do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I had intended to retire. This was at the end of the year last year, and I kept getting calls from various folks that were interested in researching aspects of the payment industry, and oftentimes there were consulting groups or private equity groups or investment groups, and I started covering a wide array of topics with them, and it just is really sort of steamrolled into its own business. And I realized, you know what, this is going to be more time and effort and a greater level of focus than I'd initially anticipated. So I formed an LLC in partnership with my wife, who's also a consultant in a different industry, and we hung up the shingle for Marvin Consulting. And as you know, I'm consulting now to BHMI, which I'm really excited about. There's quite a bit happening there. But yeah, it's been a terrific experience and completely unexpected, but exciting times for me. So
That's great. Yeah, I love it. I've always kind of had this entrepreneurial spirit, and so anytime I hear somebody that, made that leap of faith and just started their own business, and then to hear the success stories, it's just so inspiring. So,
thank you.
congratulations on your new business venture. And it's, by the way, a pleasure to work with you. So we're kind of here today mostly to talk about all the things that are happening in the payments industry. Maybe not all of them, because that would, we don't have enough time today to cover everything. But we definitely want to touch on top trends and opportunities and challenges. So, what would you say, Mark, is the most notable trend in the payments industry today?
Yeah, so I mean, so I'll talk a little historically because I think this understanding the evolution in the space is really kind of exciting, and it sort of makes clear why we're sitting where we are today. But if you can imagine, call it 50 years ago, when electronic payments first became a thing, right? You had a credit card out there, and somebody with a knuckle buster, the old slide, was sliding that card with a piece of carbon over it and using that paper as a record of the transaction, and people were managing their receivables, their payables, and their receivables off of a piece of paper, right? About the time I came into the industry, there was this beginning of sort of the notion of the internet, and people were taking paper documents and they were converting them to electronic files, and they were managing the paper that way. And I remember walking into law firms, and law firms were trying to figure out a way to get rid of all of that paper. As you can imagine, they keep records for everything, right? And you could see that same trend happening in the payments industry. Well, so essentially what you did is you took what used to be a manual process and you digitized it, right? Keeping the visual image. Well, in payments, simultaneously along came e-commerce, right? And the notion that you were going to have somebody that was paying for goods or services in a face-to-face situation now was being transferred to this not card not present or individual not present transaction, right? And that brought with it a series of challenges, but also a series of opportunities, right? And we've seen the business evolve from the face-to-face and the paper transaction to the digital electronic transaction and the card not present world. And along comes all the compliance and risk and fraud and personal information protection, everything that comes along now with that change, right? And then that was followed by the introduction of mobile wallets, right? So if you think about the identity and the subsequent payment of the individual associated with the identity or payment method, credit card, right? Or maybe electronic bank account. Now you've got a mobile wallet. So now that identity is stored in a device. And in order for it to be stored in the device, right, there are certain levels of protections and transformation in how that information is kept, tokenization, right? There's certainly all these sort of subsequent privacy obligations that come along and fraud and risk associated with it, right? So now another aspect of the industry has blossomed. So to get to your question, the next generation appears to be AI or agentic driven commerce, right? And what's interesting about that is, so I have the individual, and the individual in the days of paper could see a goods or service presented to them in some form or fashion. They said, yeah, I like that, I'm going to take it, right? In a virtual world, now they're interfacing with that in a virtual way, right? In an agentic world, what they're doing is relying on, based on habit and past activity, right? Subsequent past activity, and any of the nuance around how they protect their identity, where they're located in terms of geography. All of that now is being managed by an AI model that comes to know them, including their preferred payment methods, where they shop, how they shop, what they spend, et cetera. And as it's learning, it's doing many of the things that you would have done in a face-to-face environment, or many of the considerations that you might apply, and it's making those considerations for you, right? And so now we have this sort of stand-in commerce, right, in the form of this agentic commerce, right? And so to me, that's the most exciting trend that's happening in the market. What will be fascinating, because the market tends to, water finds its own level. The market tends to figure things out, like it figured things out for e-commerce, right? It'll need to figure out, privacy issues, risk associated, compliance obligation, cross border, the management of cross border, lots of things that'll need to get figured out. But I think that's going to be the catalyst for the next generation and evolution in the fintech space, emerging technologies, right? And then what happens when that happens, which is the same thing that happened in e-commerce, is the traditional financial institutions that we depend on to manage money movement, right, will have to catch up, right? And they'll have to figure out a way to take legacy systems, many pre-e-commerce systems, many e-commerce systems, many mobile wallet systems, and drag them along into this world of agentic commerce. And so, yeah, that's the most exciting thing I think happening in the payment space today.
Yeah, I love thinking about that. I mean, it seems like it's the future, right? AI, agents representing individuals. It will certainly provide a lot of opportunities, but inherent challenges, like how do you discern that that agent is actually representing a real person, right? So
That's right. Yeah.
I'm glad I
Yeah.
don't. I'm glad I don't have to figure these issues out. We've got people like you that are working behind the scenes to figure out how, really how the rubber meets the road. Like,
100%.
how this is wonderful. It's amazing what technology can do, but it still has to be safe and compliant, and you have to minimize risk, all of that. So
Just to comment on what you just said, I think there's also this issue of consent, right? Because an agent is representing you, right? And so, what does consent really mean? Like, how much of my data am I really consenting to you managing on my behalf? What am I consenting to you pushing towards me, right? And what are the implications of that? And then, of course, you've got, this is not a new issue, right? So there, you've got a lot of legacy regulation that's out there in various markets that all have to be taken under consideration. And then, of course, you're going to have the next generation of regulation and compliance, right, as an extension of what we're learning as agentic commerce comes into the market.
yeah, it just reminds me that it's a moving target, right? Just as we are getting used to one new innovation, the next one is already kicking off, and there's still a lot of FIs that are still in the process of getting to the point where they can send and receive real-time payments, and now we're talking about agentic commerce, and yeah, so it's always going to keep moving, right?
100%. Right.
How far we have come since the knuckle busters, is that what you called them? I've never heard of
Yeah.
that phrase before, but I do remember those little slide machines. That's, yeah,
Yeah.
wow. That's the dark ages of payments, right?
Yeah. You'd hold them like this and your knuckles would run across the top, right? You'd end up with carbon stains on your knuckles.
So that definitely is a major trend right now in payments. But let's talk for a moment about a lot of the people watching this video are specifically, uh, interested in operations, or they work at organizations that process payments. So, what would you say is the top opportunity today for those organizations that are processing payments?
Yeah. Well, you said a couple of things that I think that were good reminders for me when you mentioned real-time payments. The importance of least cost routing and least cost routing decisioning, right? And being able to bring to bear decisioning at the point of authorization, or an authorization decision, right? Being able to say what's in the best interest of this transaction and the organization and the individual submitting it, right? Meaning, how do I do this safely and securely and protect the cardholder? How do I ensure that the cardholder gets what it is that they believe that they're purchasing, right? How do I ensure that subsequent cost associated with it is minimized, right? And then after I've made those decisions, then how do I ensure that I'm processing the transaction in the most cost-effective way I possibly can as the acquirer or processor, right? And so all of that requires the right infrastructure, right? And so the opportunity is deciding now, when you may decide as an organization to make an investment in your infrastructure, deciding now what it is that from a capability standpoint that I need to put in place to ensure that I can protect the cardholder, protect the merchant, protect the acquirer, and move money in such a way that it's as efficient as possible, right? Meaning at the lowest cost possible, reconciling for it as efficiently and as close to real time as I possibly can. And just to throw a further curve, because we talked a little bit about agentic commerce, remember now also that we have stable coins and this world of blockchain coming along, which means that before I make an investment, right, the opportunity is now to ensure that my infrastructure is the right infrastructure, so that as this marketplace continues to evolve, I can continue to avail myself of the technologies that are going to be most beneficial to the cardholder, most beneficial to the merchant, most beneficial to the network, most beneficial to both financial institutions on either side of the transaction, right? And in order to do that, I can't be half-hearted, right, in how I make the investments that I'm being asked to make. But the opportunity is, if you do it correctly, you've automatically put yourself in a competitive advantage point, at a competitive advantage point, because so many folks don't understand what it truly means to do that.
Yeah, so I'm kind of envisioning, like, you plan well and then you really invest in doing it the right way, not half-hearted. Like, you commit to that, and when you do, you create you create that competitive advantage, that is going to be necessary to stay relevant and to to thrive in the industry, not just survive but thrive.
Absolutely. And opportunity is an interesting word, right? Because it's an opportunity also for the payment processing business to look at its strategy, right? And through strong leadership, which to me means really understanding the customer, the opportunity presented to your business, and the resources and assets that you have to bring to bear. Most importantly, the people, understanding how they're motivated and what it is that they do every single day, and ensuring that they're aligned with the strategy and that the resources that you're giving them to do their job uh, motivates them to show up every day, because they know they're executing as expected against their strategy, and you're enabling them to do exactly that, right? And then, if I can do that every single day, I'm now in an organization that should succeed.
Okay, so that's kind of the top opportunities. What would you say is the biggest challenge for organizations that process payments?
Well, it's interesting to go to exactly what we just discussed, right? With the points I was just making. You have to, you've got to have two lenses on your business, right? The first lens is, what have I done, right? What have I built? What have I been good at? What have my challenges been? How can I do things differently, right? And then you have to have the resources and institutional will to make the changes that you need to make, so that you can then execute the way we just described, right? How do I drive the best possible outcomes for my customers? How do I drive the best possible outcomes for my customers, because that's what they care about, right? And how can I make money as a business, because ultimately I care about my business, within the context of what I can expect to make in the form of just gross revenue, offset by my operational expense, right? And so I'm managing to that reality. And the challenge becomes, we talk a lot about AI and AI replacing people, but the reality is, in our world, the legacy systems that are running underneath so many payment processing businesses, the domain experience and understanding resides with people, right? And so I've got to drag those people along. My business needs those people, right? At the same time, I have to infuse new thinking and new capabilities. Being able to successfully manage the old with the new, to transition legacy domain experience and knowledge to the next generation, right? And simultaneously make wise financial investments in my operations, right, is going to require that commitment to strategy and the understanding of what I have and what I expect to have, and ultimately measure myself by how successful I am meeting my clients' expectations, right? And if I can do that, then I've got a future for my business and a great story to tell. But that's a challenge.
As you were talking about that, I think a related challenge is the fact that some of these legacy systems, homegrown, the people who have that knowledge are retiring. They may be leaving, and with them goes all that tribal knowledge. And so we've actually worked with some clients who their back office systems perhaps were not well documented, and the people who had that knowledge no longer work, they've retired. And so we've had to sort of to even get started on projects with them, we've had to uncover the truth. We've had to discover what, so that's kind of an added challenge right now, too. So if you have those people, it is time to know what they know, to cross train, to bring it to the next generation of individuals who are going to be basically, responsible for the back office operations. You don't want to lose that tribal knowledge. It's so important.
100%. It's interesting. You said document, which is absolutely critical. When you look at, I've had the opportunity to look at the building of several payment stacks for very large financial institutions. Part of what's happening today when you make the decision to move into the cloud is you're creating an underlying infrastructure where you're taking mission critical applications and you're creating replication for functions within those mission critical applications that become essentially fault tolerant, right? And that includes the hardware decisions that you're making, et cetera. But you have to understand what it means to have a mission critical application and what happens if it fails, right? Then you have to understand all the subsequent dependencies. And to your point, if I lose an individual, either because they retired or they understand that, but they haven't documented those understandings, that's problematic, right? And it's problematic across the entire organization because there's so now today the ways software applications running on hardware are written and maintained, they're interdependent, right? You can't lose one part and then have the rest of the application stack function properly, or the hardware stack for that matter, right? So really, really important to consider those types of things. You take the world of AI, right? And people are thinking that AI is going to write code and AI is going to do a number of things. AI can understand a great deal. It can write code, right? What it can't fully understand are the unique human dependencies that are built into the decisioning, right? When a hardware stack or a software stack is created, and the interdependencies, because sometimes those are just simply dependencies out of convenience or human experience, right? And until AI can really extract all of that and understand the implications of it, there won't be a world where those things will run successfully without the people that have maintained them and understood them all along. So
Right, right. That makes sense. Reminds me of a conversation with a company recently, and they have an individual that sort of created, let's just say something like a workaround. It's it was sort of to fill a gap. It wasn't an ideal, and they knew it, but it was basically this. We need this in order to fill the gap, and it's highly manual, and there's only one person that truly understands. Let's call it a black box. Oh, there's only one person within the organization that really understands what's happening within the black box, right? AI is not going to help you there.
there's a future state where the black box is not a black box anymore, right? It's sort of a combination of many things that are happening, and you've kind of made the black box less important, right? But we're not there yet, you know.
Right, right. And obviously the world we live in too, many of the organizations that we work with, because they want to automate. They want to, streamline, make the process more efficient, make it less, error prone, those kinds of things. So, there are better ways to do what's happening in that black box. So it's time
100%.
to kind
Yeah.
of like open it up, let's unpack it, let's figure out what's in there, and then let's, apply logic to doing accomplishing, filling that gap in a more let's just say a smarter way of approaching it, right? So,
Yeah, 100%.
okay, so I'm shifting now. This is my favorite question, but if you had to take your sum total of knowledge about all things in the payments industry and provide one silver bullet piece of advice to our audience, what would that be?
Yeah. So I'm going to steal somebody else's silver bullet advice that they gave me when I first started in this industry. It was Mike Duffy. And Mike Duffy said at an awards dinner for the top performers, he said, everybody thinks we're in the credit card business. We're not. We're in the risk business, right? And it's interesting. He's right, right? We think about all the ancillary technologies that emerge and across the payment stack and all of the considerations, all the various applications are running, right? At the end of the day, there's somebody who's made a decision to give access to their personal net worth, and the determination is made to extend them a line of credit, and then they make a determination to take that extended line of credit and use it to spend money. And the assumption on the part of the bank that loans them that money, right, is that they're going to be good stewards of the line of credit that they were provided, right? And the assumption on the part of the consumer is I've made the best decision I can because I need those funds as a resource, and I'm comfortable I can manage them. And everything in between is ensuring the sanctity of those decisions on both ends, right? So regardless of real-time payments or whatever else emerges, because in the world of real-time payments, it's account to account, right? So there's still some value that a consumer says you can have access to for the purposes of delivering me goods or services or moving money for any reason, right? The trust in all of that is completely dependent on how you mitigate the risk associated with it, right? So systems and processes and technology, everything else exists to minimize the threat to either side of that transaction, right? And I think that's important to never lose sight of, because if the sanctity of that ever gets violated, the in between applications and companies provide those applications, the surety of their business now is degraded, right? Because trust is lost. And at the end of the day, we're all dependent on that, that we trust that things will work as we expect them to work, right? So that's what preserves the system and allows it to thrive. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. It's
you're
still as
welcome.
true as it was the day you heard it when you first entered the industry, right?
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever change. I really don't.
No, I don't think so either. It makes sense. It's at the very, very foundation of payments. It's yeah, we all need financial security. We do, and so there's a lot of trust on both sides of the equation. And once that trust is broken, it's really difficult to reestablish. And unfortunately, a trust can be broken with one organization and it sort of spills over to others, right? So, yeah.
And I'm going to give BHMI a plug right here, right? Because think about the need to reconcile or to successfully manage a dispute or to accurately calculate fees or commissions. The dependency is I need to reconcile. I need to be able to say, wait a second, this didn't work as expected, right? So now I need to manage the disappointment in either how I spent money or how goods were delivered, et cetera, right? And then finally, I expect to get paid because I'm part of the in between in this money movement. Am I being paid accurately, right? And for 40 years, BHMI has successfully been able to do that for their customers, and that's why they still have a business, right? So trust is everything.
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, we see ourselves as more than just a software vendor. We are truly a partner with our client, and yeah, they trust us, and we take that very seriously. So if any of our clients ever have an issue, it's all hands on deck to take care of them, to make them whole. So yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. Welcome. Hey, it's Monday. You need some motivation too. So,
Yeah, yeah. Um, so Mark, before I let you go, we're kind of wrapping up here, but I want to make
sure.
sure that our audience knows, how they could reach out to you if they, just wanted to have a conversation with you. Maybe they want to ask you if you can help them with something that they're trying to figure out. Perhaps they need some consulting services to navigate the decisions they need to make. How can they reach you? What would you like to share about your company?
Yeah. So right now, what I would suggest, because I'm doing this with you this morning, is let's use my BHMI email. So mark.sherman@bhmi.com. My last name is spelled Schermann. And then please send me an email to that address, and I'll respond accordingly. And we can, if we want to have a phone conversation, I'll exchange my phone number, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. Well, and I'm sure you're also on LinkedIn, so that might be a way too that they could potentially
Yeah.
reach out.
Yeah. Absolutely. So,
Well, Mark, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has just been this has been a fun conversation. I learned a lot of new things about you, and I'm excited for your new business venture to see how that goes. And also very excited that we're working with you directly. So I want to just again say thank you, and I want to thank everybody for watching today.
thank you so much, Donna, for having me, and thank you to everyone out there. And please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to speak with you. So.